previously heard you state you think changing offenders is difficult. Try changing staff. Will you please comment?
And that's everywhere from Ventura County, I'm sure. When I started doing this work 35 years ago, I was just a researcher. I was interested in, learning more about it. And the more I got into it, the more I began to see it wasn't just enough to do the research. And it's not just enough to get up and do these workshops. I don't care how bad the training is. That still kind of happens. And now, almost everything we do coaching as well. And it's hard for staff for a lot of reasons. It's a big barrier is changing staff. Sometimes it's because they say I wasn't hired to do this. In the case of probation, they say I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist. No, we're not trying to make you one, but we're trying to make you an agent of change. We're trying to get you to go beyond risk management to risk reduction. But it's not just probation. Treatment providers, they're locked into a model. They've been doing it this way for 30 years. And they got lots of anecdotal stories to tell you how well it works. But they've never really looked at any hard data. And getting them to change is difficult as well. So changing staff is not easy. But I say this, you got to do it the same way you go about doing it with the people that under your care. You teach them, you coach them, you reinforce them. If they do it wrong, you keep working with them until they get it. I have a list of barriers I'll put up this afternoon. Staff is one, supervisors is another. And I'm convinced in a probation department, the key is those supervisors. If you can get those folks on board and to learn this, and they become the coaches for the staff, you've got it done. If not, it's just this up above thing and you will do it and it doesn't, they just hold their breath until you go away. So it's a great question.
It's a big piece of that culture change, right, with the agencies and departments.
It's a tough one, and I also think one of the reasons you evaluate yourself too is that you have data then, and you can convince. It'll take a correctional center, it'll take a prison, right? There's not a lot of incentives for a correctional officer to care about recidivism, right? Hell, they care. They care about getting through the day, right? But if you can show them, and I can show them data where if they do certain kind of programs, it makes it a safer institution. The problems go way down, and inmates behave better because you're teaching them how to do that, and they start seeing it. Then they buy in pretty quick, because their self-interest is this is a better place to be, right? Because recidivism to them is way out the door. They're not thinking about that. So even in your camps and your halls and places like that, there's a reason to do this work that has a benefit for everybody. But you got to have data. You got to show them that and get them to buy in a little bit and change that culture.
Great. The next question. This is kind of a program evaluation question. Ventura County Medical Center Trauma Unit is proposing a program where gang members who are assaulted, shot, or stabbed and end up in the trauma unit will be required to participate in the treatment and spend 4.5 hours in the morgue and the coroner. What do you think about this?
That's horseshit. Yeah, and it's a scared straight kind of program. It's exactly what it is. There has never been a study of scared straight programs that have shown there's some that have shown no effect. But the vast majority actually show increased failure rates, right? For a whole host of reasons, reinforcing the behavior and so forth. You really think you're going to change somebody's behavior because these are high-risk gang members that are involved in violence? Yeah, and so they're going to be exposed to the victims of violence, right? These are people that violence is part of what they do. You won't get you'll get no effects from that. I think you're wasting your time on those kind of programs.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm Grace Hoffman in the city of Oxnard. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to make the comment that I understand that was an original proposal, but that is no longer in the program design. I just didn't want anyone to leave the room thinking that was the way it was going to be.
Yeah, I think think if the target is empathy, if that, and by the way, empathy is a hard thing to change. There's actually two types. There's cognitive empathy, which you can kind of teach. In other words, they get it. Okay? And there's emotional empathy, which is much more difficult. And so that's it's a legitimate target. But again, it's one small target. As a program, those kind of programs, you don't get much effect from them. They feel good, you get publicity from them. They're kind of like gun buyback programs. The cops love gun buyback. There's no effect. There's too many guns out there. And what are they buying back? Old shotguns that nobody uses anymore. But cops love them, so they see a value in them because they get on the news and people think they're doing something about it. I was with the chief of Riverside, and he said, it may not work, but I'm going to keep doing it. So if you ask, is there some value in that from that perspective? Yeah. But if you're asking, do those kind of programs reduce violence, or in this case, reduce recidivism? And short answer is no. There's no evidence that those, exposing them to the people in coffins and working in the ER rooms. We've been doing that stuff. A lot of folks do that stuff. It doesn't show.
Will Reed, City of Oxnard. How big of a part does housing play into the role of recidivism?
It does. I mean, the studies show that it's not a big risk factor for criminal conduct. It's in our world, it would fall into what we call responsivity area. That is, when you assess somebody, you should assess their risk factors and their non-risk factors. People have other needs, okay? And those needs often have to be met. If you have no place to live, it's going to be hard for me to get you into treatment. It's going to be hard for me to work with you and do these things. But just because I get you a place to live doesn't mean I'm going to reduce your recidivism. And so our model, what we look at is about 80% of a correctional agency's efforts should be focused on criminogenic risk factors. About 20% on non-criminogenic. The further you get away from that, the less effectiveness you will have as a program. Okay? So you get somebody in, they need medical care, they need housing. Yeah, you have to meet those needs. But if you don't then target the criminogenic, you won't get the effect. Mental illness is a good example. You didn't see it as a risk factor. It's not a big risk factor for criminal conduct. In fact, most studies show no correlation between mental illness and criminal behavior. There's some exceptions to that, certain kind of psychosis and so forth. But think of how many people suffer from depression and anxiety and schizophrenia. They're not involved in criminal behavior. But we have many mentally ill people in the criminal justice system because we've closed all our mental health programs, so they end up in jails and prisons. We're not saying that doesn't need treatment. It does need treatment. But once you've got them stabilized, once you've worked with them, now you have to address their other criminogenic risk factors. Because if you don't, they'll be back in 6 months. That's what our data shows. We get them in jails, we get them stabilized, we send them out. Nobody's targeted all their substance abuse and their lack of employment and their attitudes and all those other things. And for the severely mentally ill, it's a challenge because often their families are done with them. I mean, they really have very few support networks there. So it's a tough group. But that's how we look at it, and that's how we look at housing as well. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient.
David Deutsch, Telecare. I agree with that about the housing because we see that a lot of people come to us thinking, if I just had a place to live, everything would work out. And it's a much more complex issue. What I was going to say, we always talk about pro-social activities. What we hear from a lot of our clients is because they haven't, many of them have not had a lifetime of incarceration, they don't really know what pro-social activities are, or even if they do, that's not their peer group, and they don't know how to get involved. So I've been working within the prison population, while in prison, encourage people to go to school when they get out. Not that necessarily means you're going to get a bachelor's degree and get a job, because not everybody's cut out for that. But it puts you around people who are engaged in pro-social activities.
Right.
Does that resonate?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. A lot of inmate guys come out of prison, what do they think? They think everybody knows they're an ex-con. I mean, either the tattoos or whatever, they think everybody sees that, so they're often not comfortable in settings, right? And so what you've got to do though is if you can, again, you start with if I can change how your attitudes, who you hang around with, now you want to spend more time with your family. What are pro-social activities you can do with your family? You can go to movies, you can go to park, you can go bowling. Get them into this is a place where I think faith-based groups can play a role, because they will reach out and involve people and engage them in pro-social and get them around pro-social people that can teach them that you can have fun without getting high or out doing these things. Because, it's just teaching an inmate how to bowl, you just have an inmate that knows how to bowl. That's not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is exactly right. Hook them in those pro-social networks, teach them how to have fun, teach them how to be with people they care about, not get in trouble. A lot of inmates, I used to see this a lot, inmates would come out of prison and they'd say, I know I can't hang around with the wrong crowd. So they'd isolate themselves. Problem is, we're not social isolates. We're social animals. And eventually they gravitate back to the old crowd. Reason was because they hadn't replaced them with pro-social people. And that's why I said, I think when somebody's under supervision or in treatment, you start out by assessing not just who they get in trouble with, who don't they get in trouble, who's that network they can call. I'll tell you one quick story about that. I know we're going to go to lunch. I worked with one department once, and they had parolees and probationers, kind of like you're going to have. And they had once a month, the department would have a potluck dinner. And POs had to nominate an offender, and they had to bring somebody with them. And it was the department's attempt to bring them together with pro-social people. And most of them would bring their spouse or whatever, right? This one guy had done 27 years inside. So he was a lifer. He came out. He had nobody. He lived in a little boarding house, but he had a job. And he brought his boss. And I remember being there, and they all had to go around and introduce who they were brought. And it was the typical, he got up, he had, very weak social skills. He said, I'm Joe, this is my boss. And he sat there. And the boss stood up. And he was kind of this old, rough guy. And he said, look, people thought I was crazy for hiring this guy. He said, he's been a great employee, shows up every day, handles the customers. He said, I believe in this guy. This is a man I think is worth saving. You don't think that's powerful reinforcement for somebody that has no one? I mean, he wants to do right by this guy. You know what it cost that probation department to do that? Nothing. They had an old VFW hall or something. They had once a month they'd have this dinner. But little simple things like that where you're really trying to hook them up to pro-social people. In this case, it's all he had was his boss. So I encourage you to do those kind of things. They're very important.